Welcome to the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Our mission is to help executives become better cyber risk managers. We are your hosts. I'm Kip Boyle, CEO of Cyber Risk Opportunities.
And I'm Jake Bernstein, Cybersecurity Counsel at the law firm of Newman DeWars.
And this is the show where we help you become a better cyber risk manager.
The show is sponsored by Cyber Risk Opportunities and Newman DeWars, LLP. If you have questions about your cybersecurity related legal responsibilities,
and if you want to manage your cyber risks just as thoughtfully as you manage risks in other areas of your business, such as sales, accounts receivable, and order fulfillment, then you should become a member of our Cyber Risk Managed program, which you can do for a fraction of the cost of hiring a single cybersecurity expert. You can find out more by visiting us at cyberriskopportunities.com and newmanlaw.com.
What are we going to talk about today?
All right, today we're going to talk about the non-technical things you should be doing to manage your cyber risks.
Well, wait a second. Cyber risk, I thought that was all technical. So what do you mean by non-technical?
Yeah, this is exactly why we're talking about this. Some executives that I've spoken with over the years think that cyber risk management means, for the most part, buying and installing a bunch of software and hardware products and just letting the IT department, kind of handle that. And while they're doing that, the executive kind of forgets about cyber risk and goes back to their job until the next product refresh cycle, which, might happen a year or two later. So that seems to be the common conception of cyber risk management. But, Jake, just as well as I do, that cybersecurity is a journey. It's not a product. And in reality, there's quite a bit of recurring activities in order to have good cyber risk management program where you need to get your people, your processes, and your management involved in addition to your technology.
Can you give me an example of that? It seems really important, but also a little abstract.
Yeah, it's very abstract at this point. So I've got a couple of examples that I think will help make this idea a bit more concrete. So let's look at something from the detect function in the Nist cybersecurity framework, and so what it says, and in question form, how well does your organization monitor for and detect unauthorized users? And that reference is DE.CM-7.
Wait. You just said DE.CM-7. That sounds like something in an instruction manual or an industrial code or even something that a lawyer would say. What does that mean and where does it come from?
Yeah, all right. So, all right, I'm trying to make it easy, and I actually made it a little bit more abstract again. All right, so let's just roll back a moment. So the Nist cybersecurity framework, first things first, that was published in 2014. And for anybody who doesn't know, Nist is an acronym, and it stands for the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And you might think that's part of the Department of Defense, but it's not. It's actually part of the Department of Commerce here in the United States. Nist is a really interesting agency. It does everything from cybersecurity, as we're talking about now, to things like what's the definition of a gallon of milk? I mean, how much fluid is in fact a gallon of milk? And when you pump gasoline, what does it mean to get a gallon of gas when fluctuating temperatures can change actually the amount of gas that you get? So
yeah.
It's important for commerce.
Yeah, and they define like a kilogram and a pound and all that
right.
kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's standard measures, and we've learned that standards are a great thing to have. It really does enable commerce, and so by presidential order, Nist was compelled to attempt to set standards around cyber risk management, and they did something really, I think, excellent. Other organizations that have done similar things sometimes convene a panel of scholars, and they sit in a room for weeks or months, and they say, well, what should people do? And they build a standard. But Nist did something different. They actually went out into the private sector and said, hey, we need to build this framework. Will you help us? And so Nist really acted more as a facilitator or coordinator of the standard, and the actual standard itself was written by industry, which is, as I said, pretty amazing. And in fact, it's it's a bit of a living document because NIST has continued to engage with industry to try to figure out, all right, we've got version 1 of this thing. What should the next version look like? And what did we miss the first time? What could be better? And so there's going to be some upgrades to it as we go along. But
Yeah, and didn't we discussed this before on this podcast? I believe listeners can go back and look at episode, I think, 2 or 3, where we discussed the NIST CSF in conjunction with the Federal Trade Commission.
Yeah, and if you decide to listen to us in future episodes of this podcast, I'm sure you're going to hear more about the NIST cybersecurity framework. So the idea here, the goal of the framework, is to help organizations assess and improve their ability to identify, prevent, detect, respond, and recover from cyber attacks. So there's 5 high-level functions. And then there's about 22 activities underneath those 5 functions. And then at a third level of detail, there's about 98 third level items. So that's kind of how it's constructed. And
So
so that reference that I gave you, DECM-7, is the unique identifier for this example.
is it the third? So that's the third level citation. It would be DE is detect. CM is, what is
I,
CM?
well, I think that's continuously monitor.
Continuously monitor, and then so -7 would be the 7th sub item under continuously monitor.
Yeah, that's right. That's how you read.
Lawyers, yeah, we like citations like that too. It's like how we cite to statutes and cases and everything like that.
Yeah, and it turns out engineers and
Engineers, yep, engineers would do the same thing.
yeah, and standards making people like it as well. I actually like it too because there's a lot of stuff in there. When I speak with a customer about what they need to do, it's great that I can just say, well, here's exactly the part of the standard that we need to look at now. So
Yeah, that's helpful.
that's why I'm in the habit of citing it. Okay, so you ready to continue with the example?
Yeah, let's do that. So DE.CM-7.
Right. And so the idea here is that when user accounts are stolen or compromised, especially the powerful administrator accounts, typically this is part of an attack pattern, and that can result in a data breach or unexpected downtime for your organization.
So how does your cyber risk management program benefit from doing this well, the ability to detect and kind of continuously monitor?
Right. Well, this is super important because, and this is very simple, I hope, the more quickly you can discover that you have an intruder, the more likely it is that you can prevent an already bad incident from becoming much worse. So
Okay,
that's the
so I definitely want to be able to do that. How would I? What's the best way to monitor and detect unauthorized users in my system then?
Yeah. So this is where we kind of get back to this common conception that cyber risk management is some kind of a product that you buy and install. And there certainly are many, many products that you can go and buy and install. Some of them cost a tremendous amount of money and require a lot of ongoing resources. And a lot of people think, well, I need to do that, but that's so expensive, and I don't know, maybe I need to go find a vendor to implement it for me, or maybe I just need to outsource that. But what I like to say to people is, hold on, that's not your first stop on this journey. The first stop on this journey is, if you have nothing in place right now, don't try to skip directly to some kind of a highly scalable, highly automated, extremely expensive tool. You can start very simply. You probably have everything you need right now, or if you don't, you can get these pieces for not a lot of money. So your systems are already generating logs today about all the different things that happen on them. And all you need to do in order to monitor administrator accounts is you need to make sure that you're collecting the right data on on when those accounts change, or those groups of accounts change. So as long as you're collecting the right data, then what you need to do is you just need to look at that data, say, once every 24 hours. And so you can go get a very inexpensive product, or if you've got a highly technical person on your team, you can actually just use the Perl scripting language, and you can export the logs on a daily basis, and you can write a Perl script that can automatically search through those logs and find any indication that your administrators group has changed, and then that can be put on a report. Now, if you don't have anybody who knows how to use Perl, then you could go buy a product like Netrix Auditor, and that's spelled Netwrix. Netrix Auditor. You go to netrix.com. You can find out about them. By the way, we don't get any. We get no compensation for recommending Netrix. It's just we've had some really great experiences using that product. But however you do it, what you want is you want to know, when is my administrators group changing? In other words, are there user accounts coming into that group? Are the user accounts being removed from that group? Or is it changing in any other way? And anytime you see that it's changing, you want to investigate it. You want to find out, well, was it supposed to change? And so you have to do a little digging in the beginning when you start doing this. It's a little time consuming. But once you're doing this well, then one of the biggest indicators of compromise for all kinds of different attacks, you now have under control. So it's pretty amazing. And then from here you can do other things too. So for example, you probably have a payroll system, and that payroll system has an administrator account on it, and you could do the same thing. You could have a daily report that tells you how the administrators group in your payroll software is changing, and again, it can give you this alert that you're under attack.
So something that it's interesting, we're talking simultaneously about how there's these non-technical things that you can do, but we're also talking about Perl and scripts and computer logs. But I think what's important to realize is that just because you have a tool or a script or logs, that doesn't mean you're doing cybersecurity, right? Someone has to exercise judgment on all this data.
Right.
It's a lot like teaching a computer to spot the camouflaged animal in a picture, right? It's a lot easier said than done, right? I mean, a human can do it relatively quickly. We're actually particularly good at that. But my understanding is that, teaching computers how to do that pattern recognition is very hard.
It is.
And
yeah.
So this is the same kind of thing, right? I mean, there's all this data, and yeah, there's some technical tools, but really what you need is you need someone who has judgment and knowledge to see that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's right. So that's where the people and the process and the management comes into play. If you go out and try to buy some kind of artificial intelligence or machine learning driven solution, and if your idea is, I'm going to look at everything and I'm going to sort through everything and I'm going to look for every instance where somebody's doing something that I don't want them to do, I just think you're biting off way more than you can chew. And it turns out even the largest enterprises don't get this right. So a good example of that is Target, the retailer, and Home Depot, another retailer. And so in the as we know, they both got hacked and had tens of millions of credit cards stolen. And in the retrospective, right, in the root cause analysis of what went wrong, how did somebody get in? And it turns out that their systems had in fact detected an intrusion. The problem was that they were searching on so much stuff that they didn't recognize the individual collection of alerts, the small amount of alerts among millions and millions of other alerts, and they just didn't see it. They were trying to do too much.
Yeah, so discovery of the problems is very challenging. So that's good to know. How about one more example of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, so let's take a look at the recover function. So just to recap, so Nist cybersecurity framework has 5 functions. We just looked at a thing that needs to be done in terms of being able to detect incidents. Now let's look at recover, and recover is the last function. So it assumes that if you've had an incident, you've detected it, you've responded to it, which means you've contained it so that the damage isn't spreading anymore. And then the last function is you want to recover from an incident. And so let's take a look at one. And it says, after a public data breach, how well do you manage your public relations to protect your organization's reputation? And that's the citation here is rc.co-1. Now, most of us have never done this before. And you've never had to manage your reputation after a public data breach, but that's exactly the point. With something like this, you cannot wait until you're in that situation to figure out what to do. It's such a pressure cooker, and you're going to need experts. You're going to need a plan, and if you may be listening to me right now saying, well, how bad can it be? Well, I'm going to give you two examples of how bad it can be.
Mhm.
And the first example is probably one that you've seen, the complete dumpster fire that is Equifax's data breach in their ham-fisted attempt to respond and recover from it, right? So we've seen
Yeah,
congressional
that didn't
testimony
that
and
didn't go well for them, did it?
no, it went horribly for them. And here they are struggling to explain themselves after this horrific data breach, which, you know, they may be ultimately found to be negligent. Um, but I have a hard time believing that the executives at Equifax explicitly knew that this could happen or would happen, and I think that's what we're seeing here is that they really didn't think it was going to happen, and so here they are struggling, and unfortunately, their situation just keeps getting worse and worse. We've seen some news reports in the last week
I
or
saw
two
that.
that there was actually even more data in the breach than they first let us know. And I've got a whole separate presentation that I do where I break down the Equifax data breach into each of the 5 functions, and we sort of explore whether or not Equifax has had reasonable cybersecurity or not. But I think we can all agree that Equifax is a case study in what not to do when you're recovering from a public data breach. And I want to give you another example because I think this one's in some ways even worse. In 2015, in the United Kingdom, there was a mobile phone company called TalkTalk, and the CEO, Dito Harding, gave video interviews as she desperately tried to uh, take control of the narrative, the post-breach narrative about, did Talk behave reasonably? How did this data breach happen? What are they going to do about it? And it's just painful, so painful to watch the CEO just struggle to say the most basic things without news reporters twisting
Hmm.
words and taking things and just really making her life and the lives of her employees and her customers just super, super painful. And I don't wish this on anybody. So just, don't become these people.
Don't do it. So, how does a cyber risk management program benefit the company from if they do this well? Like, what's the
Right.
value here?
Yeah, so let's talk about the business value of good recovery. Well, so we've got data, public data that's available in the public that was done in response to some research. And it shows that when a public data breach happens to a company, they can lose up to 6.5% of their customer base in the weeks and the months that follow that public data breach. And that's abnormal churn, which is to say customers leaving because of a specific event. And what's important is that you probably have what might be considered a normal churn rate, right? You've got people who stop becoming customers for all kinds of reasons, and you regularly have to replace them, and then hopefully get more customers so that you grow. And to lose 6.5% of your customer base very quickly after an incident like that can be incredibly expensive to recover from. And why is that? Well, because you're losing revenue, and at the same time, you've got to spend more money to acquire new customers, and we all know that it costs more money to acquire a customer than it does to retain them. In general, that's
Hmm.
what's going
Hmm.
on. So the business value of being able to recover is it should be clear, right? I mean, you're talking about top line revenue, and you're talking about ultimately bottom line, because your expenses are going to go up. Not only the expenses of acquiring new customers, but at the same time, you're going to be spending a ton of money just managing the data breach. You're going to have to do notifications. You're going to have to get some lawyers involved. You're going to have to do digital forensics. You're going to have to answer inquiries from state lawmakers, potentially regulators, federal regulators. I mean, it's not a good time. And the last thing you want is a lot of customers leaving all at once. So it's really horrible. Uh,
Yeah, no, very much so.
but what's amazing and what we talk to our customers about is, risk isn't just about all downside. There's actually good opportunities inside of risk, right? That's the whole reason why we have private
Mhm.
enterprise. We're putting assets at risk, and we're going to make a good return on that. That's the goal. Well, so guess what? You could actually, if you lean into this risk and you do a good job at it, you can actually enhance customer trust on the backside of a data breach. And and how do you do that? Well, through the transparent handling of the crisis. And you might be thinking, okay, Kip, great theory, right? How does that actually work? Well, I have two examples.
Yeah.
So yeah, so in 2013, Adobe, which is the name of the company that produces Photoshop and a bunch of other creative software, they had a data breach. And one of the things that they did really, really well is that they were quick to notify their customers of the breach. And because their customers had accounts in their systems, they actually sent out a series of password reset emails to let people know that there was a problem and to give them something that they could do in order to protect themselves.
Hmm.
And you know what? It must have worked because those actions, along with some other actions that they took, when people talk about the poster children for data breaches, I don't ever hear anybody mention Adobe. Do you?
No, no, I wouldn't have even known they got hacked, actually.
That's right. They handled it so well that that nobody even thinks about it anymore. And you can go to Google News and you can search and you'll see many headlines. So it wasn't like the news media cut them any slack. They didn't. It's just that Adobe was ready, and when the time came, they did a masterful job at responding and recovering. And again, it had much more to do with people and process and management than it did with technology. And I got one other example for you, which is Home Depot. Home Depot got hacked just like Target did. And just like Target, Home Depot lost control of tens of millions of credit cards. And just like Target, Home Depot was in the news for a long time. But what's interesting is that even though both those companies got kind of hacked the same way through a third party vendor, Target is over and over and over again held up as what not to do. And in contrast, I don't hear Home Depot mentioned nearly as much. What's your experience?
Not as much, no. I mean, I think I hear Target talked about far more than Home Depot, even though I think the Home Depot breach may have been technically larger. I don't recall if it was or wasn't, but I
Well,
think
it
that
was the same magnitude of breach, that's for sure.
yeah, exactly. So no, I mean, I think, and certainly, I know. I mean, now that I think about it, Home Depot. I mean, people talk about Home Depot as having been breached, but when you talk about kind of, bad cybersecurity or mistakes or failures in this, you almost always hear something more about Target,
Mhm.
or of course Equifax, which I think has
Yeah,
basically taken everyone else, and just, they're the clear masters of not handling a breach well.
that's right. Okay, so and we've talked before on this podcast about the court of law versus the court of public opinion, and this is your respond and recovery efforts as an executive of your organization is going to say a lot in both of
Hmm.
those courts, right? So the
Yep.
reason why Home Depot doesn't show up nearly as much as Target does is because why? Because they did a great job handling the incident. So one thing
Yeah.
they did is even before they fully confirmed that they had a data breach, in other words, as soon as they suspected that they had one, they immediately notified their customers and they walked out the response and recovery from the data breach with their customers. They invited their customers sort of to come along with them as they continued to investigate and continued to figure out what happened, what's the extent of what happened, how is that affecting everybody. And so they actually didn't suffer nearly as much as
Oh,
Target did,
uh,
even though it was almost the same hack.
Oh, it's fascinating. I mean, I think the lesson here is that contrary to what certain lawyers might, advise at certain times, transparency is often the better course of action. I mean, what do they always say, right? It's not the crime that gets you, it's the cover up.
Yeah,
And whether you're looking at Nixon and Watergate or the current Russian investigation, the focus is always on not necessarily even what happened, but the attempt to cover it up.
yeah,
And that's a lot like the same concept holds true for data breaches here. Is that, look, uh, getting breached is not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a badge of shame. I mean, everyone is. What do security experts say? There's only two types of companies in the world, right? Those who've been breached and those who don't yet know they've been breached.
exactly,
So
exactly.
it doesn't have to be this oh my gosh, we can't say a word about it. Now, that doesn't always hold true. It depends on the industry, right? But it does seem that you can get yourself in much bigger trouble just by trying to hide it or not
Yeah,
doing a good job communicating.
exactly.
So it's good to see that communication is its whole section under the recover function of Nist CSF.
Yeah, that's right. And in the moment, in the heat of the moment, most human beings don't want to talk because it feels embarrassing. You don't know what to
Yeah,
say. So you can understand why people kind of are tempted to do the cover up. But if you've done some pre-planning for a public relations crisis like a data breach, and of course there's other public relations crises that you can find yourself in. So if you do pre-planning, you reach out and get a public relations expert on your team, and it could be somebody that you contract with. It doesn't have to be an employee on staff. And you create the plan. And then most importantly, and this is where the process and the people and the management really come into this, is that you have to practice that plan. If you don't,
yeah,
then when you need it, number one, you're not going to know where it is. Number two, you're going to have to blow an inch of dust off the binder, right? Because
yep,
you haven't touched it for so long. And
yeah.
so
No,
what they do is practice it like maybe every 6 months. You spend an hour with the people, the most important people who are going to execute on that plan, and you just remind yourself of what this plan is asking you to do.
yeah. So you might hear that concept referred to as tabletopping. Do a quick tabletop exercise, and often you hear that with incident response plans. But really, this PR component of recovery is, or it certainly should be, part of your incident response plan.
Yeah, that's right. So you want to be able to respond, contain the damage, and then you want to be able to recover, right? Which is get back into
Get
business. And
back
there's
into
so many
business.
things, right? There's so many things you need to do, but today we just want to focus on this idea of what do you need to do in order to manage your public relations. And in the midst of everything else, the wheels just flying off your cart, it seems like managing public relations would be the least important thing. And I think hopefully people who are listening now realize, no, it's an incredibly important thing. And
Incredibly important thing. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
So, all right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today on the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Today we talked about the non-technical things that you should be doing to manage your cyber risks, and we've only really looked at two things. There's so many more things. We hope we've given you a good example of this. Thanks everybody for joining us today on the Cyber Risk Management Podcast.
Remember that cyber risk management is a team sport and needs to incorporate management, your legal department, HR, and IT for full effectiveness.
And management's goal should be to create an environment where practicing good cyber hygiene is supported and encouraged by every employee. So if you want to manage your cyber risks and ensure that your company enjoys the benefits of good cyber hygiene, then please contact us and consider becoming a member of our Cyber Risk Managed program.
You can find out more by visiting us at cyberriskopportunities.com and newmanlaw.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.